Hi, my name's Ben Shreeve from the University of Bristol, and I'm here to talk to you about our paper, The Best Laid Plans or Lack Thereof, Security Decision Making of Different Stakeholder Groups. Now, in this paper, we wanted to explore how do stakeholders make decisions about cybersecurity requirements and needs. And this is really important given that many stakeholders are not cybersecurity experts, and yet they're expected to make decisions that have cybersecurity implications, be they explicit or implicit. Now, to do this, we studied how 948 people working in 208 teams played a cybersecurity decision-making game. And we've got a wide range of participants, all the way from C-suite execs through to cybersecurity forensic students and apprentices. Now, what have they been doing? Well, they've been playing something called Decisions and Disruptions, which has already been validated and reported on. This is a tabletop exercise that challenges small teams of between 4 and 8 players to help a fictional hydroelectric company to improve their cybersecurity. The company exists with two separate sites, one a plant and an office site. They're physically separate. They have a number of assets that they need to help protect. Teams are given 100,000 fictional monies to spend each round over 4 rounds, and they have to identify which investments they should make from this list. And they have to prioritise because obviously they can't buy them all at the start. Now, if they choose to play the asset audit, the entire infrastructure is thoroughly assessed for vulnerabilities. They find that there are a number of issues on top of the original cards that they should deal with. And teams suffer cyber attacks at the end of each round based on their decisions. And these have financial implications. So they might have fines, there might be theft of funding, there might be loss of business. But this loss is totaled and used to establish performance. Now, what are we trying to answer? Well, firstly, what effect does a player's background have on their team's performance? Does having a cybersecurity expert in your team really help? 2, what is the effect of diversity of expertise on a team's performance? Is a mixed team better than a team that are entirely specialised? 3, what patterns can be seen in decision-making processes of players and teams? And this last one we're able to answer because we have transcripts for the gameplay for a small subset of the cybersecurity expert-only teams. So, first finding. Player background has no significant impact on team performance during the game. Now, what we're looking here is the average score under the non-bust column. This is the amount that teams have lost on average, and there's no statistically significant difference between any of the backgrounds. The bust status refers to the fact that you can bankrupt the hydroelectric company during the game, and this just gives you an indication of what percentage were bankrupted. What's worrying here is the fact that having a cybersecurity expert in your team tends to mean that you might be one of the worst performing teams. When we look at diversity of expertise, we again find that there's no impact on performance during the game. A mixed team versus a team consisting entirely of cybersecurity experts, there's no statistically significant difference between the two. In terms of common decision-making patterns, as I mentioned earlier, we're only talking about a small subset. So we've looked at 8 teams consisting entirely of cybersecurity professionals. We've analysed their transcripts using thematic analysis. Now, we identified a number of broad themes. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all of them, but we'll pick out a few to look at in detail. So, one of the interesting ones here is thinking is a luxury. Now, this we've used to really describe the fact that sometimes teams will use a great deal of reasoning when making their decisions. They'll really consider things in detail. But at other times, they'll make a decision with no reasoning whatsoever, or no explicit reasoning. Maybe they know something that we don't, but they don't talk about it. And sometimes their reasoning is just straight bizarre. So this team said, all right, if I were an attacker looking at 10 companies and one of them's got a really good firewall, I think I'm going to prioritize attacking that one because they've put a really good firewall in, therefore they've probably got something really good behind it. Which is a bizarre way of thinking about things, to say the least. Now, all of these teams are cybersecurity experts, and we had expected that we would see them using threat modeling, common risk assessment, risk evaluation of some kind, but we didn't really. In fact, there's only really one team that stopped to break down the threats that they perceived. So this team stopped to say, okay, so phishing might be an issue, ransomware might be an issue, but we don't have antivirus in place. A distributed denial of service attack is an issue, but you don't have firewalls. And that's before we even think about whether there are insider threats or outsider threats. When it comes to responding to attacks, we again get a big difference in the way that these teams deal with events. The first is a laissez-faire approach. They say, oh well, it's happened to us, it's probably not going to happen again. Which, given that they're professionals, is again terrifying. We know in the real world that if you suffer a cyber attack, it's probably going to happen again. Other teams, meanwhile, might have spent a good hour plus putting together a strategy to invest items in a certain order with sound reasoning, but as soon as they hit a certain event, there's a knee-jerk reaction. They suddenly drop everything, change their plans, and we kind of want to be somewhere in between, really. Now, let's talk about some key takeaways that are helpful for stakeholder engagement we've gathered from this analysis. The first is the fact that context is king. What we've established is that it doesn't really matter what background people have. If they can understand the context, then they can probably establish an understanding of the risk. And that just means that we probably need to listen to our stakeholders more. We don't necessarily need to get the cybersecurity experts in every single time. We need to talk to these people and help them think about risk. And with their knowledge of the area, of the context, they can identify a wide range of risks. Obviously, that leads to this point. Sometimes you have to explicitly ask about risk. During decision making, it doesn't always happen. And sometimes people need a little help. Sometimes they need a little bit of support to identify cybersecurity as a particular risk. But, again, no difference in performance based on background, therefore people can do it. Finally, we have this strange issue where people get confused between vulnerabilities and threats. People spend a lot of time worrying about who is going to attack them, when the reality is that this is a very difficult thing to gauge, and less time thinking about vulnerabilities, which they can identify because they have systems, and we have CVEs, and we have patches, and these are basics that they can cover off, but they often get neglected because they think of cybersecurity as worrying entirely about the threat actors out there. Sometimes thinking about these two separately is going to help stakeholders identify more internal and external risk factors. Now that's all the time I've got to go into this paper, but I'd just like to say thank you for watching my presentation. If you want to get in touch, here's my email address and the website if you want to put together decisions and disruptions for yourselves. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming and attending the Q&A session for paper The Best Laid Plans or Lack Thereof, Security Decision Making of Different Stakeholder Groups. I'm Daniela Damien from University of Victoria, your session chair. And Benjamin Shreeve is here with us. Thank you so much for a great presentation, Ben. I'm going to take the first question that was posted from Rogard. Will this hold if the security complexity increases, or if it was a real situation since they know it is just a game? So how real was it?
It is a game, but it is based on a real world approximation, and it's been validated in previous tests. So this data set, we just have to say that it's within the realms of the exercise, but the exercise is based on the real world. So it's a ish sort of answer. What we'd like to do is work on more complex scenarios to explore it in more detail.
Yeah. Follow-up question from Fabio. Would it be a fair summary that initially you'll need security experts to play purely elicitation roles, Socratic roles, for eliciting risks and threats by domain experts?
You mean have we worked with the domain experts in order to create the scenario? Is that what you're really? I think that's what you're really asking.
The risks.
Yeah. So this game has been created with security experts and played extensively with them to refine it before this data capture. So, yes.
Charles, why do you think the experts didn't do threat modeling?
Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm going to come back to Fabio. I can see you just put a comment in there.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So Fabio, I'm saying that stakeholders know better because they have a better understanding of the context. So because they're working in the domain every time, they are better able to appreciate the nuances than the security expert that gets parachuted in to assess a situation. So that's what I'm talking about there. Charles, I think the security experts may have been slightly complacent. You know, they are aware that they're playing a game, and that may have led to their lack of threat modeling coming out. But it's a really hard one to explore in more detail. We have got follow-up studies being planned, so hopefully we'll have an answer for that going forwards.
Great. The next question from Ashkan. The problem with talking with CEOs or middle managers, they just redirect you to IT or technical experts, and they do not spend time, or it is very difficult to have the team ready listen to you. Based on your research, people other than cybersecurity experts are better players?
I think what we found was that anyone who has experience dealing with risk day to day is able to understand the game, and that's where we talk about understanding of context. So we've played this with both the IT teams within a business, but also with senior managers and board level execs in the same company, and you find that anyone who is able to gauge risk gets to a similar conclusion in the exercise. You do sometimes see cultural similarities between businesses in the way they approach things.
The other two comments are responses, conversations between Awais and Rogard on context. I wanted to also ask a question, if you allow me. I was very interested in your notes and observations and insights about the stakeholders, how they manage this. And it makes me wonder, what's specific about cybersecurity? Could you have chosen any other non-functional requirement that's harder to define? You know, we have multiple interpretations and perspectives, and you think the stakeholders would behave in a chaotic way as well?
I suspect you may find that this holds for other, like you say, complex scenarios, not just cybersecurity. We just happen to work in the cybersecurity discipline, so we explore the way that they interpret risk and time and power pressures. because this is the area that we study.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Makes me wonder whether you could extrapolate to other non-functional requirements, characteristics of the requirement you looked at. In this case, was security, right?
Yeah, certainly. And you're going to have many examples where specialisms and interpretation of risk exist. Especially if you open into wider engineering communities.
That's right. Do you want to comment on any other notes that are being made?
I'm just reading through them. I think Awais, who's one of the co-authors, is answering them as we go as well, which is very handy.
Yeah. Where from here, Ben, on this research?
So future research is going to be exploring more complex scenarios, because this is effective, but has some methodological improvements that could be made. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we're looking at making more complex scenarios where we can explore more aspects, including time pressures, which we will report on hopefully soon. Should be exciting.
Yeah. So others, Ashkan also thought about reliability, safety. Yeah. So you may come towards a theory of effective stakeholder engagement or non-functional requirements, right?
It helps for benchmarking certain behaviors and understanding the decision making behind them, which is really useful.
Yeah.
I just seen Fabio's comment. People don't necessarily react well to going bankrupt. I mean, you might be surprised by that, but it upsets some people. It's more worrying when you find out who some of those people are, but we can't talk about that.
Yeah. Do you think it would matter the size and the maturity of the company?
There's certainly a variation that happens between companies. So in more established companies, they might have a particular approach to risk, and you'll find all of their teams use the same thinking. Certainly, you see this with teams that come from a military background. They all have the same problem-solving approach, and they're almost identical. So certainly, I would expect age of company, size of company to also be factors. We haven't really measured those.
Yeah, because you could also examine the same phenomenon in startups and see what tolerance they have and approaches they might come up with, right?
Now, Awais has just flagged up the fact that there is another paper out which explores the decision making. Yeah, which is a different way of analyzing the same sort of data. Yeah,
and Rogard comments. Awais also comments on the notion of expert. And what's expertise? Expert in what? Security experts, but they are not experts in the day-to-day of what goes on in the organization.
Yeah, which is the point that I was making earlier, where you have this. You might not be a cybersecurity expert, but you are an expert in the area that you work in. Therefore, if you are encouraged to think about risk and given assistance to be able to think about it from the cybersecurity perspective, you can probably identify more risks than a standalone cybersecurity expert.
Yeah, we can take one more question from Ashkan. There's 15 seconds left. We can continue in the discussion room. How long did you spend preparing the stakeholders for an assessment?
All right, 5 seconds. About 2 hours and 200 sessions.